Well, the first cab on the rank off the rank for our evening slot is myself, and the title of my paper is called "The Reception of the Christianam Confessionem Anglicanam in Reformation, Zürich in 1553." There's a handout that goes along with it, and feel free to utilise that or not at will. I shall begin. The Kingdom of England has entirely the teaching and faith that we also have. So wrote that great reformer and antistes of Zürich, Heinrich Bullinger, on the 29th of July, 1553. A big year. We've heard a bit about Bullinger already. But unaware that Edward VI had now died, Bullinger drafted these words for a speech before the small council of Zürich. His purpose in the speech was to overturn the city's censorship committee, which had rejected his application to print the English Christian Confession, partly on the grounds that it was irrelevant to Zürich. Bullinger disagreed. That kingdom, he said, is large and famous, has many well-learned men, many leading bishops, and 2 universities. The English Christian Confession brings our religion great esteem. It's actually a long speech and an interesting story, but what matters for our purposes is that Bullinger got his way because he thought the book was that important. In fact, this mistake of not printing it prompted an immediate reconstitution of the censorship committee, now including a pastor of Zürich, to prevent future theological blunders. Furthermore, the book's significance was such that it became the only English work translated into both Latin and Swiss German throughout the entire Reformation. It's pretty big. Scholars of the Reformation have long been interested in the influence of the continental reformers upon England. More recently, historians such as Dermot McCulloch, Torrance Kirby and Rob Wainwright have helped us rediscover Zurich's importance for English religion, though. But apart from Kerry Euler's Couriers of the Gospel, great book, much of this scholarship has only looked in the direction of Canterbury. In this short paper, I want to look in the opposite direction. For amidst the treasure trove of Bullinger's letters, of which is about 12,000, more than more than Calvin and Luther combined, from that treasure trove of Bullinger's letters, there lies an underexamined gold mine of material which shows how the great Swiss reformer appreciated and deployed the English Christian Confession to impact Zürich and its surrounds. But what, I hear you thinking, was the English Christian Confession? Well, in short, it was a singular book printed in England around the beginning of June 1553. It contained John Ponnett's short catechism and the first appearance of the 42 Articles of Religion we've heard about earlier discussed by Pearson versus Burgess. Now, Ponnett's short catechism, actually about 68 folio pages long compared to the 17 of the Articles, it was structured around the Apostles' Creed, the Decalogue and the Lord's Prayer, contained major doctrines in a thoroughly reformed and evangelical manner. In fact, I've got a prop just to show you. It would come as the one book. This is not to scale, but in terms of the proportion of pages, this is the amount of pages of the Articles as compared to the Catechism. But it was printed as a singular book. And you can look at the title page that was referred to earlier about approved by convocation and so forth. So this combination book was authorised, or at least, the Catechism specifically, was authorised by King Edward, the Lord President of the Council as well, Northumberland, various bishops, and was printed under the royal seal and intended as an authoritative summary of the faith. So the Catechism was a big deal. The 42 Articles were later compressed, as we know, into the 39 Articles, and they were the work of Cranmer and a team of other leading theologians. And this combined volume printed in English, Latin, and Italian, the first Italian book printed in England actually, was generally understood as the Catechism. The book itself, total, understood as Catechism. And because of its theological clarity and potency, the Catechism became a key target of Mary's Counter-Reformation. Hugh Weston tried to pin it all on John Philpott and then Thomas Cranmer. John Feckenham tried to fix the blame on Nicholas Ridley. And the first Regius Professor of Divinity in Oxford, booted out, then came back, traditionalist, he didn't come in the same role, but traditionalist Richard Smith, he wrote 2 whole volumes called The Buckler of the Catholic Faith against it. But before Mary's accession, and even before Edward's death, this combination book was triumphantly dispatched to Zurich. On the 7th of June 1553, Sir John Cheek sent the little book, the Libellum, to Heinrich Bullinger. He happily received it sometime before the 29th of July. So it was sent by Cheek on the 7th of June, received sometime before 29th July, and that's when Bullinger rebuked the censorship committee. And eventually, by the latter half of August, Bishop Bullinger had his copies and he mass mailed it out to an array of Reformation allies. Bullinger had several motivations for broadcasting the book. Zurich was sensitive to accusations of novelty. It felt a sense of isolation. So the book served his aim to bolster their embattled cause because the prestigious Kingdom of England now stood with them. Remember, of course, Zurich is like a little dinghy compared to the Titanic, which is England. However, by the time that the book was published in Zurich, the news of King Edward's death had now reached them. So the book not only served as a great argument for the legitimacy of their Reformed doctrine, it now also served as a token of remembrance. And with that, the couriers of the gospel were hastily dispatched from Zurich and in a range of directions. Now, while the complete list of recipients is unknown, 12 surviving letters from 10 recipients show who received the English Christian Confession from Bullinger. The letters reveal fascinating aspects of its reception and illuminate its impact upon various Reformation issues. The earliest of our letters from Bullinger is to that great Genevan reformer John Calvin. On the 26th of August, Bullinger wrote to Calvin with the terrible news of Edward's death from suspected poisoning, he said, Jane Grey's overthrow, and also the persecution of reformers as Mary rounded them up. But, quote, the most holy king, he said, had died most happily and with a holy confession, meaning the English Christian Confession enclosed with the letter. For Bullinger, its theology symbolised the treasure Christ's church had lost. Now, Calvin, embroiled in the Servetus affair at the time, may have received it as some encouragement, and perhaps reading this tragic little book may have steeled his resolve to remove the Spanish arch-heretic from its midst. 2 days later, Bullinger sent the book to the German reformer Matthias Erb, who served in the Alsatian town of Reichenwehr. Erb was called to introduce the Reformation there by 1536 by Count Georg of Württemberg, and Bullinger proved to be like a bit of a Barnabas to him. There were 200 letters exchanged between Bullinger and Erb, and he was a great supporter. Using language like that of his letter to Calvin, Bullinger expressed to Erb that the book would reveal to him the magnitude of the loss the Church of Christ had suffered in England. And while the book's direct impact on Erb is unclear, Erb did produce his own Catechismus just a few months later, possibly shaped by the Reformed theology of the English Christian Catechism. Check some of the Eucharistic theology, and it's very similar. We can, however, observe a striking reaction from Heinrich Bullinger's own brother, Johannes, who pastored the church of Ottenbach, which was in the ecclesiastical jurisdiction of Zurich. However, so Johannes wrote to the Antistes on the 31st of August that the English Christian Confession pleased him greatly. However, he took issue with Article 14 of the 42 Articles, that no man is without sin but Christ alone. It had displeasing implications, and he thought that the article should end with, among those already living, to spare Jeremiah, John the Baptist, and the Virgin Mary. Now, this quibble may reflect his quarrelsome nature. He had, in fact, been disciplined for a pub brawl 8 years earlier. He was known for being a little bit quarrelsome. But it also attests to the lingering presence of conservative Marian doctrine in the Zürich region. On that very same day, 31st of August 1553, Conrad Lycosthenes wrote to Bullinger from Basel, praising the catechism by which he met the entire Christian confession, the English Christian confession, and thanking him for sending it. Around the same time, Simprecht Vogt, the Antistes of Schaffhausen, also wrote to Bullinger, offering some thoughtful reflections. I'll put him up, there he is. While grateful for the English confession, Vogt found one thing lacking, that is Bible references. In what could be seen as a precursor to the 1646 Westminster Assembly's decision to add some proof texts to the confession, Vogt argued for their inclusion for two reasons. First, so that neither papists nor simple folk might think that the doctrines were just plucked out of the air, and second, because without scriptural anchors, the teaching could be more easily overturned. Sound advice. Sadly, he was dead by 1561, so he couldn't suggest it to Matthew Parker for the update of the Articles of Religion. Also in September, several letters tapped into a problem that had flared up in the Graubünden region, perhaps a region best known for various James Bond skiing scenes near St. Moritz. I looked up the Jaws one with the cable car. It's actually filmed in Brazil. I know you're wondering. Anyway, during the Reformation, that area became a refuge for many Italian evangelicals fleeing the Inquisition in 1540. You've got to think the Italians, they fled en masse. And you think about the names they talk about, Zanchi and all these various names. They're coming across up out of Italy through the Alps into these places, into these regions. And these religious exiles soon posed challenges for the magisterial reformers, as many held Anabaptist or radical views, creating conflict in the very region where Bullinger felt a paternal responsibility. The preface to the Rhetian Confession of 1552, that's the sort of Rhaetia area, throwback to the Latin name of the place, it explicitly, this is the preface, goes into detail about the problem of the Italians. It says, it singled out, quote, certain peevish Italians whom nearly nothing pleases. Part of the background of that is moving from the tyranny of Rome and the kind of heavy-handedness to struggling with magisterial regulation in a number of these places. But it was the Italian Peter Paul Vigario who became the lightning rod for trouble in September 1553. He was a heavyweight reformer, having formerly served as papal nuncio to King Ferdinand of Germany and enjoyed cordial relations with Martin Luther in Wittenberg and then Martin Butzer during the Regensburg Colloquy of 1541. Vigario fled Italy for the Reformation cause in 1549, and while Bullinger respected him, he was also wary, and for good reason too. Vigario had just translated Johannes Brenz's Lutheran Catechism for circulation throughout this area. And Brenz's Eucharistic views, Lutheran Eucharistic views, were unacceptable to Reformed theologians. Thus, when Vigario wrote from Chiavenna to Bullinger on 3rd of September and acknowledged the receipt of the English Catechism, his silence on it, and in fact the Lord's Supper debates, was deafening. By contrast, a letter from the pastor Agostino Mainardi on the very same day and from the very same town of Chiavenna complained. And these guys were kind of arch enemies. They kind of went at each other. And Mainardi was very good friends with Bullinger and Vigario less so. Mainardi said about this long letter about Vigario, he said, "We have not had peace since this man has been in these regions. We have our own catechisms which conform to yours. So it's little wonder that the English Christian Confession was circulated to other parts of this region by mid-September. Philip Gallicus in Kerr thanked Bullinger for sending the catechism, particularly in light of Vigario's provocations. Bullinger also wrote to Jan Travers, emphasising the parity of Reformed theology around the region. You will see that we are not the only ones teaching this doctrine, but that it is resounding even far off in the islands of the sea, by which he meant England. The final two recipients take us westward. Firstly to Biel, where Ambrosius Blauer served, who was previously in Constance, the big reformer of Constance, till they were booted out. Blauer was a first-generation reformer, closely connected to Huldrych Zwingli, Butzer and Wolfgang Capito. So his glowing comments to Bullinger about the, quote, learned and most Christian catechism of England was high praise indeed. And lastly, we come to Lausanne, where the rising reformer Theodor Beza was serving. He reported that reading the English catechism brought him to tears, yet he still nitpicked the dissent clause encapsulated in Article 3 of the 42 Articles. While the article stated that Christ descended into hell, Beza would have noticed that the catechism read into hell or elsewhere. Safe to say he would have likely approved of the final and shortened version found in the 39 Articles in 1563. So we've come full circle from Calvin to Calvin's future successor, with Bullinger at the centre. What then was the significance of the English Christian Confession for Zurich and its surrounds? Well, firstly, and maybe most obviously, I mean, there are a lot of implications, but maybe most obviously, Heinrich Bullinger held it in very high regard. He recognised its alignment with Zurich's theology and sought to leverage the prestige of the English Reformation to strengthen the Reformed cause across Europe. For this reason, he immediately sought to print it, extolled its virtues, overturned the censorship committee's ruling and composition, and immediately broadcast it to at least, at least, this is all we know about, 10 Reformation allies. Extant copies of the book show that other Zurich luminaries, such as Rudolf Gualter and Josias Simler, owned it too. It's got the ownership, their name on it. Yeah. Given the enormous reach of Bullinger's Republic of Letters, so-called, it's highly likely that the English Christian Confession had more reach than we realise. Secondly, most recipients gave it glowing praise while lamenting what England had lost. And this suggests some further realignment of Reformed doctrine and some probable influence in the doctrinal and catechetical writings of those reformers. There were minor quibbles over scriptural references and the dissent clause, but these too suggest thoughtful reception and underscore engagement and perhaps a degree of appreciation. One significant area of appreciation was in the Graubünden, which demonstrates the way that the English Christian Catechism fortified the Reformed cause against both Italian radicalism and Lutheran Eucharistic theology. But thirdly and finally, this case study highlights the significance of the English Christian Catechism as a combination document of the Catechism with the Articles, which represented or was seen to represent the Reformed theology of the Church of England at the height of the Edwardian Reformation. It served as a symbol of hope and led to a lesson in lament. It was little wonder that in the months following its reception, in mere months following its reception, Reformed Zurich would become such a vital source of refuge and strength for those Marian exiles who previously wrote the Christian Confession and continued to uphold its doctrine. What John Ponnet wrote to Bullinger in 1556, "I seem to be altogether united to you," well, this would be a sentiment shared by many of the other English reformers too. Thank you.